Night settles and the air hums. Horizons blur under stone, rivers shimmer, and the earth itself feels restless, shifting the moment you dare notice it. This ever-changing land waits, and few who seek its secrets ever return. That is where I come in. My name is Asteron, a cyclops and cartographer. I am bound not to kingdoms, but to what resists being held. With only one eye to seize what most will never glimpse, I mark what would otherwise disappear. Welcome back, weary traveller, to Sleeping Figures. If you enjoy thoughtful and calming tales, consider leaving a like and subscribing. Now, dim the lamps, let the screens fade, and let the maps unfold around you, threads of rivers and currents that slip unseen beneath the surface of the world. Tonight we walk with Asteron. His quest is not conquest, but the pursuit of what vanishes if left unmarked. The flowing paths of light and shadow that carry both wonder and ruin. So let the unseen currents rise and step with him into the vein of worlds. Asteron's vessel was nothing more than a raft stitched from timbers pried off old ruins, lashed with iron nails scavenged in silence. Beneath him stretched the volcanic sea, a body of molten memory disguised as water. Its surface smouldered in muted glow, crusts of crystallized ash drifting like broken panes of glass. With every pull of the oar, sparks leapt from impact, painting him in fleeting constellations. The air itself weighed heavy against his lungs. It carried a metallic taste, burned with sulfur, and yet behind that bitterness sounded voices. Not loud, not nearby, more the lingering timbre of conversations buried beneath centuries. The sea earned its title for that continual whisper, lost names, half-screamed directions, murmured confessions rising like steam. Some were clear enough to resemble instructions, others tangled beyond sense. Asteron rode deeper, unmoved. He had long since learned that obsession requires ears trained to doubt. Currents caught his raft, spinning it between ridges of cooling lava. Glow lines veined the sea's surface. Had he unrolled parchment then, lines could have been marked already, but he refused impatience. A map drawn too quickly deceives. So he gripped steady, staring across the molten horizon. The reflections showed not himself but shapes of others, some giant like him, others frail human figures, all staring back while fading like smoke. Cartographers. He realized their likeness suggested more than coincidence. At last, the raft nudged shore. An island waited, black and glassy, shards rising like frozen flames. Here the whispering grew sharper, distinct syllables caught in crystalline throats. The Isle of Glass housed echoes of cartographers before him, their last words trapped as permanent fracture points. Stepping onto jagged surface, his sandals scraped against slick facets that refracted tiny sparks into his single eye. He could nearly believe the voices addressed him by name. He pressed deeper into labyrinths of cooled magma. Walls polished to mirror-like sheen revealed him in distorted multiples. His massive form, towering above common men, repeated across facets, always the single glaring eye, always his broad shoulders hunched against burden. In every reflection, he was at a different point in life. Youthful vigor, aged husk, a hand reaching in frenzy, while another released parchment in defeat. The voices carried lament. They urged caution. Those who mapped the vein tore holes they could not stitch. He listened, but his jaw clenched in stubbornness. Warnings were familiar companions. Then a shimmer caught him. Within a vast crystal chamber lay a figure, small as a child but rigid, encased in translucent amber glass. She looked no more than 12 summers, yet her face bore not innocence but unnatural knowing. Streams of pale light coursed across her closed lids, flickering backward and forward as if her mind travelled places unseen. For a moment, Asteron thought he faced a statue. Then the smallest breath clouded against the crystal's inner surface. He approached slowly, laying one massive palm to the glass. Immediately the whispers erupted into a roar, colliding, desperate. Fragments begged him, "Leave her entombed, preserve the barrier, protect the vein." But his eye locked on hers, now stirring open beneath the transparent casing. The gaze met him, flooded with visions not of this isle, but of every place he had ever dreamed. Colours clashed, rivers bled into horizons. She was not only prisoner, she was vessel. His choice came without thought. He drew aside his iron chisel, struck against the crystal seam. The impact rang out like bell metal, vibrating through each vein of glass across the island. Shards cascaded outward, slicing his forearms, trickling warm blood to volcanic stone. The child slid free, collapsing against his hands. She did not cry. Instead, she whispered words in a tongue both foreign and entirely known. "You carry the map already. I carry the fragments." Her voice pulsed within his skull, bypassing ears, twisting across his thoughts like threads of ink spilled uninvited. Asteron stiffened. He had expected release. He received binding. The glass chorused warning, harmonizing their despair. To split the river into full maps meant rupture. To chart every current risked shattering balance itself. He heard, yes, but he had carried warnings his whole life, and now before him was not an echo of past cartographers, but a living shard, an oracle child whose presence promised guidance. The girl looked upward, eyes flashing with rivers too sharp for daylight. No map could capture such currents on parchment, yet he felt compelled. She reached, touched his weathered sketchbook. Across the blank page, thin ripples of light sparked as though reality itself wished inscription. The girl said nothing further. She simply waited, heavy with visions beyond his comprehension. Still bleeding, Asteron lifted her into his arms. She weighed near nothing, as if body reduced to vessel alone. He stared once more at fractured cartographer echoes sealed in glass, their despair singing constant refrain. And then, with grim resolve, he turned from them. His path set. He would carry this oracle with him, defiant against warning. If the vein of worlds demanded obsession, then he would answer not alone, but accompanied by this child who saw through rivers of light. The raft drifted from the Isle of Glass, its edges scorched and weathered, carrying Asteron and the oracle child into calmer stretches of ashen sea. The volcanic glow remained on the horizon, but ahead the waters thinned into shallower threads, glowing bands of current weaving like molten embroidery. For the first time, he unfolded parchment across his knee and brought charcoal to surface. His hands shook, not from fear but from reverence. At last, the time for charting had begun. The first strokes were cautious. He traced the broad eastward pull where waves seemed to fold into themselves, leaving spirals of cooled rock. The girl watched calmly, her eyes reflecting streams invisible to his sight. As he added those lines, she murmured faint syllables half-formed, as if memory itself spoke through her. Each utterance guided his hand toward a subtle bend he would have missed, or corrected a curve where reality refused straightness. But then came the strangeness. With one sweep of his charcoal, he marked a cluster of glittering islets on the horizon. The moment the lines set into place, he lifted his head and caught his jaw tightening. The islets had already begun to shift. One melted into vapour, as though ashamed to be caught. Another doubled upon itself, edges breaking like fractured glass. It was not his maps reflecting the world. The world responded to them, bending and shifting to his marks. The realization sent a chill through him, sharper than any warning. He tested it again. A whirlpool glimmered in the distance like a spiral coin spinning on water. He sketched the circle, bold and certain. Yet the whirlpool obeyed his mark, swelling, widening, rising to a column that threatened his vessel. The child laughed softly, as if it were expected. With hurried strokes, he erased half the circle, and at once the column subsided back into sea foam. His stomach clenched. He realized his drawing board had become a blade. The girl tilted her head. "You draw doors." That was her first clear phrase in his tongue. When he asked what she meant, she only tapped the parchment again. Doors that open, doors that close. Some lead forward, some open into lies. Then she said no more, her gaze distant, eyes flickering with visions only she could see. He studied her words in silence, their weight taking root without further explanation. Mapping had always been labour against chaos, a way to steady what tried to slip away. Yet now, each attempt at order changed the world itself, sometimes calming, sometimes breaking. Is it even right to continue? He wondered, fingers tightening around charcoal. Does this pursuit bend the world more than it preserves? He rubbed a weary hand across his temple as the raft drifted, watching some currents knot tightly while others fractured into haze, denying him a clean line. That night, he set parchment aside. He feared drawing more would summon ruin. Instead, he listened to the sea breathe. The child whispered in dreams, words slipping from her mouth without wakefulness. Lines that bind, in time they cut, in time they heal. Asteron leaned closer, straining to catch, yet phrases dissolved like smoke. It occurred to him she might not be speaking to him at all, but to the rivers themselves, or to dozens of unseen maps waiting in futures unknown. The following dawn, he tested restraint. Rather than charting entire currents, he marked a single line, a gentle ridge of shore where basalt cliffs cut across red dawn. This time, he sketched softly, without certainty. When he looked up, the cliffs remained, neither warped nor vanished. Maybe humility in mark-making held balance. Perhaps it was not the map alone that twisted reality, but arrogance in thinking it could be wholly captured. This lesson he swallowed, though bitterness lingered. As days unspooled, his charts filled with hesitant lines, patched images, tentative circles he did not complete. The scroll became less an objective mirror and more a negotiation. The oracle adjusted his strokes with finger pressed lightly to the parchment, never smiling, never frowning, only acknowledging that this compromise held for now. Yet even in compromise, the toll pressed heavier into his shoulders with each page. He wondered whether salvation for others required self-ruin for himself. Imagine a continent that does not rise above ground, but swells beneath it. Asteron reached cliffs so sheer their summits cut into mist, jagged walls that looked more fortress than earth. There were no footholds, only a single fissure at the base that inhaled air into its depths. He knew this was not mere cavern. The cliffs pulsed, faint but rhythmic. He stepped forward, and the sound trembled through him as though entering the lungs of stone. The entrance tightened behind once he passed through. Walls smoothed into passage, passage rounded into corridor. Each bend curved without logic, yet never repeating. Torchlight from his pack flickered against mineral veins that throbbed like arteries. The oracle child clung to his shoulder, silent but alert. Her eyes widened, mirroring faint glow hidden within the rock. Asteron's instinct pressed him to draw, but parchment here only fluttered useless from shifting drafts. The stone did not wait for marks. It breathed. Corridors folded in and out like the steady rhythm of breathing. The sound was heavier than wind, filling the narrow space. From one wall grew a doorless arch, its edges smooth as if shaped moments before. He placed his broad hand on the surface. Warmth pulsed against his palm. Then a voice rose through the stone, not in words but in pressure on his bones. Asteron stopped. The oracle murmured softly, "It wants memory." He swallowed hard. Memory had always been refuge. His birthplace anchored him even as seas and skies reshaped under his pen. To bargain that away was to dissolve root. Yet corridors closed behind. The labyrinth offered no retreat. He lowered his oaken head, whispering stiffly of the valley where he had first taken breath, the ridges, the smell of pine, the clutter of stream where he learned balance. He did not speak to recount. He spoke to surrender. The moment words left him, the details slid into absence. He could not recall the colour of the pines, nor the bend of the stream he once waded. Blankness groaned where memory had lived. The wall softened, arch opening wider, drawing them into deeper halls. He staggered forward, unease bending his spine heavier than any pack. The loss was immediate. He felt not lighter, but fractured. To surrender memory is not like losing an object. It is like biting into fruit and finding it hollow. He pressed his eyes shut, straining against fog, trying to recall his mother's voice, but even tone had dissolved. Asteron clenched his jaw with shame. Maps he could protect, past he could not. Labyrinth chambers expanded, immense domes sculpted by no craftsman, yet organized in unnatural harmony. Pillars stretched like colossal vertebrae. Curved ceilings resembled diaphragms rising, falling with subterranean breath. It was not metaphor. Each step resounded with pulse. He felt his soles gripped by veins of rock, tugged gently as if the labyrinth itself measured him. The oracle gazed placid, unconcerned. She placed her tiny hand against a pillar, murmuring inaudible phrases. The stone answered with subtle shudder. They were communicating. Though he understood nothing, he braced parchment on his knee, desperate to regain control. He tried to sketch, line for corridor, domes for chambers, but as he drew, the labyrinth shifted. Corridors sealed where ink promised continuity. New halls birthed where he left blank page. Again the cage of responsibility snapped around him. His charcoal not only recorded, it provoked. Fear rose that if he insisted too strictly, he might collapse walls upon himself. Still, to abandon charting felt unthinkable. He chose compromise, shading, fragments, notes of sensation rather than exact form, a map of impressions. Maybe stone allowed partial truth. Deeper still, the labyrinth demanded second toll. The voice pressed harsher this time, offering only emptiness, shaped like a memory not yet surrendered. The oracle looked at him, eyes unreadable, waiting. Inside his skull, a surge of refusal rose. Too much yielded, and he would cease to know himself at all. He pressed his palm against the wall and said aloud, voice ragged, "No more." Silence followed like a held breath. Then the corridor shifted open, granting passage without payment. Perhaps the lesson was not endless sacrifice, but knowing when to refuse. The journey bent into void of sound. Somewhere within vast halls, his ear caught resonant tremor that resembled patterned directions hidden behind tone. He realized. The memory he had sacrificed had become compass. A gap in mind corresponded to passage in stone. He faced left archways without recognition, yet his feet knew where absence directed him. What he lost guided him forward. He both cursed and revered the irony. Fragmented memory left him wounded, but it plotted clearer path than any chart. Hours or days blurred among curling veins of living stone. Hunger and thirst dulled sense of time. At last corridor exhaled him into chamber vast enough to mimic sky. Its dome glittered with crystalline constellations, pulsing faintly in rhythm with labyrinth's heart. Here the oracle shivered upon his shoulder. She whispered, "Center, near center." He lifted face upward, letting constellations bleed into his eye. They shaped not stars but flowing veins crossing, intersecting in luminous pattern. Directions to the veins' hidden flow. He stumbled back, overwhelmed. The labyrinth had structured entire map above him, illuminated in stone-born sky. He etched quickly but without precision. Terrified perfection might shatter image. Even smudged, these notes burned significance first true hint of central artery. When finished, he collapsed to knees. The oracle steadied him not with hand, but with gaze. Her silence offered cold reminder. Knowledge always took portion of flesh, past, or sanity. Now he carried location closer to heart of vein, yet stumbled half empty of origin, his birthplace erased. He whispered hoarse into the chamber air, "I am fragment." The stone reverberated back, a low groan shaping into words that felt poured into his skull. Fragment leads. He staggered at the echo, unsure if the voice was truly stone or only his broken memory speaking back. The passage opened towards surface. He trudged forward, maps clutched, identity shaken, progress monumental yet costly. Imagine a canyon that does not rest upon ground but hangs, suspended in sky, pulled taut between horizons. Asteron emerged from the labyrinth, into this impossible rift. Its walls seemed carved not from rock, but from condensed light. Above him blazed not one sun, but several, each fixed at angles that battered him with conflicting shadows. His single eye watered as every shadow multiplied, collapsing across itself. Even sky seemed pierced with fractures, splintered like crystal under strain. The air twisted with heat, not of fire, but of mirrored brilliance. Each beam bent differently, reflecting entire landscapes crooked across vertical surfaces. One cliff shimmered with a forest that did not exist. Another showed oceans breaking upon storms far below. A third reflected only his own towering form. This was no canyon alone. It was a hall of mirages, facades layered within shimmering fractures of light. Every step revealed twice the distance, then half again, until footing itself felt unreliable. The oracle child settled lightly against his shoulder, her gaze fixed not forward but to the multiplicity of reflected worlds. For the first time her tone carried the weight of urgency. Choose careful. Here all roads echo your shadow. Asteron gripped his map, scrolls tighter. He felt sweat break from his palms, though air was arid. The rift of suns bent certainty. Each movement might fracture into contradictions. He advanced along ledge, narrow as rope. Across him, mirrors of light thickened into forms, figures that looked alarmingly like himself. The first stood upon reflective plane, parchment clutched in hand. His single eye glowed with unwavering clarity, mouth rigid in thirst for perfection. This double shook parchment-like law, muttering corrections with fever. Asteron stepped back, heart heavy at seeing what his obsession might already resemble. Another appeared, hunched and ragged, his scrolls shredded, voice broken in laughter. He scrawled lines without meaning, whole canyon bending with manic distortions. This doppelganger bore ruin of mind, lost to endless doors that never closed. Asteron knew with cold dread. This was a possible end if he yielded too deeply. The last copy stood silent, parchment blank in hand. No lines touched its surface, only pale emptiness. Yet its eye remained calm, unlike the others. It seemed freed from struggle. It simply waited, resigned or wise. Asteron could not decide. Each version weighed him heavier than stone. The canyon demanded decision: merge, scatter, or remain trapped among them. His instincts screamed of danger, for each double advanced as if tethered to him. The obsessive one raised map aloft. Complete or all collapses. The broken one tore parchment to ribbons. Only failure awaits perfection. The silent one offered emptiness like release. Their voices mingled into chorus, echoing from canyon walls, fractured back tenfold until words pressed behind his skull. His pulse quickened. He understood that scattering them would only mean denial, pushing parts of himself away, leaving them to wander broken. Yet his heart told him this canyon was not a place of combat, but of belonging. The vein did not want division. It wanted recognition that drawing maps shaped the world as much as it reflected it. His chest ached with fatigue. Slowly, he stepped into the center where fractured suns converged. He lifted his arms wide and whispered to the echoes, "I am incomplete without all of you." The obsessive double screamed, parchment burning like fire. The broken double shrieked, torn maps dissolving in air. The calm double nodded once, and then their forms bent inward, collapsing into his chest like waves rejoining shore. Pain pierced him memories unnatural, flooded single eye. Hundreds of maps he never drew yet should have, realms where he erred, places where compassion redeemed him, paths where ink betrayed. Each contradiction seared him, but he held firm, absorbing rather than resisting. The canyon convulsed. Fractured suns spun like wheels, their beams intersecting into lattice over horizon. The oracle covered her face, but through her fingers lit rivers flowed, bending into arterial threads across sky. Asteron gasped, realizing sudden truth. The vein was never a system of static paths. It was consciousness, responsive to choices. Each map he etched didn't simply note a current, it shifted perception, redirected flow, participated in creation. He was both cartographer and accomplice to reality's design. The truth pressed over him heavier than stone. Every line I draw can heal or wound. My arrogance could twist the fate of entire realms. What I once cursed as an error might have been a birth. What I thought was preservation may already be a chain. The canyon roared with light, recognition burning raw. He trembled on his knees, whispering ragged, "I do not record alone. The vein records through me." As silence bled back, fractured suns dimmed into subdued orbs, no longer burning painfully into his vision. Canyon stabilized. Reflections settled into faint gleams, mirrors fading into manageable glimmers. Where doppelgangers once stood, only shadows remained, patient without menace. Asteron breathed long exhale, chest finally easing, though burden remained. Oracle lowered her hands, eyes fierce as flame. She spoke. "You see now, right and river bends, refuse and river waits." He closed parchment slowly. For first time, he did not hurry to mark newly realized truth. Instead, he let weight linger, uncertain whether pen should rise at all. His eye swam with visions, yet unreadable lines. He understood he was not solely cartographer, but collaborator, and every line carried risk of distortion or gift of salvation. Still, despite his fear, a strange calm settled within. He would continue. Yet now he bore reverence sharper than before. The rift of suns stretched onward, its blades of light parting like curtains. Ahead shimmered corridor, unlike canyon or sky portal of undulating brilliance. The oracle tugged faintly at his beard, urging passage. Asteron stepped forward, altered irrevocably. Behind him, the fractured doubles vanished, leaving only memory within his chest. Within their merging rested balance. Obsession tethered by humility, collapse tempered by purpose, emptiness filled with resolve. The vein itself had reshaped him, and from this moment, his maps would never again be simple lines. Weightlessness greeted them with cruel gentleness. Asteron stepped forward and felt stone dissolve beneath his feet, only to find himself drifting through a vault that had no floor, no ceiling, no compass of direction. His rafts, charts, even the ache in his knees, those anchors of the old world, hung suspended around him like debris scattered in water. This was no sea or canyon. This was the celestial archive, a place where even gravity seemed written in fading script. The first sensation he noticed was silence deeper than any cavern. It was not absence of sound, but a hush so complete it pressed against skull and rib alike. Then came sight. Rows upon rows of shelves floating unmoored, they extended in every direction. Endless stacks, carrying not scrolls or tomes, but fragments, shards of brass instruments, twisted needles, broken compasses spinning in futile circles. Each relic hovered as if bound by unseen threads. The oracle child remained calm, drifting beside him as though born to weightless skies. Her small fingers reached toward a shattered astrolabe that glimmered faintly with stored memory. At her touch it flickered alive, projecting for heartbeat a starlit horizon that none had seen, then extinguished. The broken compasses, the skeletal tools they served, not as instruments any longer, but as archives of what world had once whispered. Asteron gripped parchment close to his chest. His instinct screamed to record, to outline even chaos. But here the act of drawing meant little. Directions swirled in ways that mocked straight line or curved compass. The shelves rearranged themselves like breath, first a corridor stretching forward, then spiraling upward without boundary. He felt the same dread he carried inside the labyrinth, yet heavier. Time itself bent until moments circled back, days collapsed into instants. He thought he glimpsed himself drifting past from another angle, mid-stroke with charcoal gone before he could call out. Across drifting stacks, something drew his eye. Not relic, not tool, but parchment, an actual map. It pulsed with faint brilliance, resting on a pedestal of fractured sextants. He drifted closer with pounding chest. The lines etched upon it were not tentative or smudged compromises. They were confident, flowing veins of rivers that chained together seamlessly, a completed chart of wonder that stretched across worlds. Every artery of light, every hidden passage, all there on that page. His breath seized. Then he noticed the signature, not his own blunt scrawl, nor an elder cartographer's forgotten name. It was signed in delicate hand by the oracle, yet older, bearing a name she had not yet spoken. A version yet to come of the child floating beside him. Cold realization dug into his ribs. This was not his destiny. The archive revealed truth he had never dared imagine. The vein itself had chosen the girl, not him. For long minutes he could do nothing but stare. He thought of nights spent in torment, pressing ink onto page while fighting terrain that slipped away. He thought of tolls paid, memories surrendered, identity fractured, truths burned into his single eye. All for what? So that at conclusion, torch would pass to child already destined? Bitter laughter nearly rose, but exhaustion stifled it into hollow sigh. Still, temptation burned. He imagined folding that completed map into his satchel, walking away, and declaring the torment ended. Who would know? Who could contest? His fingers hovered close to the parchment's edge. A voice whispered within, "Take it. Claim the ending." The oracle drifted near, silent. She did not reach out, but her eyes glowed with rivers of possible futures twisting painfully in their brilliance. That gaze reminded him, if he stole this chart, he would strip her of the role that was already hers. To choose mastery here would mean forcing reality itself to bend under his hunger. Knowledge purchased at the price of compassion. He pulled his hand back, shaking as though burned. The archive around him reacted subtly. Shelves shivered, compasses whined at high pitch, fragile corridors rearranging like disappointed sigh. Even in silence he felt judgment. Not condemnation, but recognition that choice mattered more than claim. He looked again at signed chart. Its lines no longer glowed as brightly, as if acknowledging it was not his to lift. Asteron turned away with shudder, yet unease refused to settle. If he was not meant to finish, what was his role? Labour until breaking, only to prepare soil for another? For the child? He had wrestled oceans, challenged stone, merged with tormented doubles, all in name of truth. To withdraw felt like betrayal, yet to continue risked greater theft. Wounds of obsession cut deepest when confronted with futility. The oracle finally spoke, but her words offered no balm. "Not yet," she whispered, voice thinned with echoes. He pressed, demanding answers, asking if she knew destiny that awaited her. But she closed eyes, refusing, folding silence around herself like cloak. Suspicion twisted him. Did she accept role given, or recoil in fear? Was the vein cruel to cast burden upon someone who had no chance to choose? These questions weighted heavier than any stone corridor. He drifted deeper into archive, guided not by compass but by gnawing guilt. Around him instruments continued spinning, shards of calculations fractured. They mocked his need for precision. He reached out, brushing broken compass whose needle whirled endlessly. The touch sent sting into his bone. In that moment he understood the archive was memory of every failed attempt to master the vein. Everyone before him believed completion theirs, until reality cut thread. Their tools broke, their charts scattered, only pieces remained. He now joined that procession, another soul forced to reckon with unfinished lines. Still, something within stirred hope. The map signed with Oracle's name was confirmation that continuity stretched beyond him. His work, his sacrifices, they were not waste, but foundations leading here. Perhaps obsession could find redemption in service rather than ownership. Yet acceptance was never easy. His fists crushed parchment blank, sweat streaking down his arms as fury and release tangled. When at last they drifted out of archive's endless corridors, weight returned suddenly to his boots. Ground trembled beneath, breath rushed back. But silence of archive lingered, gnawing unspoken questions. The girl walked ahead quietly, offering no gratitude, no explanation. Asteron's jaw clenched. He realized his journey now balanced on knife. Choose compassion, or press hunger until even destiny shattered. Sleep would not soften conflict. The vein had made its design clear, and he walked on, weary but steadier, carrying both burden and a fragile calm into deeper mystery. Darkness clung heavier after leaving the archive. Asteron trudged onward, mind torn between defiance and surrender, when he noticed something strange. The currents of light he had once tracked so carefully no longer bent clear before him. They fluttered, faded, blurred into haze. His single eye strained until pain radiated deep into his skull. The oracle whispered little, but her silence told truth. What sight remained was incomplete. He stood at boundary of perception, able to grasp just fragments. He tested it. His broad hand stretched toward a ribbon of light coursing across valley mist. From one angle it gleamed radiant, but shifted slightly, and it vanished, leaving only mundane rock. He squinted, sweat beading. With one eye alone, he could not triangulate. He could not see both river of spirit and path of stone. The vein had concealed half behind curtain he lacked power to lift. Rage rattled his chest. To come so far, to carve memory and self away, only for his body to betray final reach, it was unbearable. But Oracle raised her eyes to him and murmured, One eye to world, one eye to vein. But you have only one. The words cut clean. He could not escape them. To continue meant more than effort. It demanded mutilation. That night he lit ritual fire, with ashes gathered from volcanic shore. He remembered whispers from glass voices long ago. The vein consumes what you love most. He had assumed they meant sanity or origins. Now he realized it meant differently. His eye, final thread to ordinary horizon, must be sacrificed into the rivers themselves. He sat staring at reflected flames dancing over his calloused fingers. The child oracle watched still, her expression neither pity nor command, merely waiting to witness. He pressed a shard of volcanic glass between his hands. Its edge shimmered faint and cruel. Fear coiled, not for pain but for emptiness that would follow. He whispered, sight for sight, blindness for clarity, then pressed the shard downward. A rush of searing heat overwhelmed him, breath caught in his chest. Warm blood trailed down his cheek as he lowered his head, offering his eye into molten ash. The fire hissed softly, swallowing what he surrendered. When he raised head again, world altered. Material outlines dimmed, blurred like fading charcoal smears. Trees, cliffs, stones, all fell into haze. Yet between them blazed rivers of fire-bright brilliance, chords pulsing like arteries across night. Each one connected horizons unseen, overlapping lattice of realities now revealed at last. His chest heaved with awe. For first time he could gaze directly into heartbeat of the vein. The oracle approached him softly, touched his bloody hollow with fingertip. Now you walk true. He heard her voice not outside but inside. Words came with luminous certainty. At that moment he understood he would never again see ordinary sunsets, never again trace faces of companions. What remained clear was only vast design of unseen rivers. His humanity faltered, replaced by cold precision of cartographic revelation. He tested charcoal once again. Instead of sketching cliffs, he traced glowing threads spreading infinite. Lines poured faster than hand could keep. Paper brimmed with radiant symbols, intersections repeating pattern unknown before. He felt himself split. One half mechanical scribe of vein, one half fragile remnant of flesh stumbling blind through mundane terrain. Contradiction sank heavy, but inescapable. This was the price exacted, the ultimate cartographic tool purchased by sacrifice of human wholeness. Still he walked forward. Trees tangled unseen under his boots, but he guided himself solely by burning paths above. For moments he forgot the weight of blindness, feeling only the rush of truth flowing freely at last. Then a stumble against root jarred him back. Pain lancing up his shin, reminder he still dragged a body through ordinary ground. Half-sight pulled him down, half-sight pulled him high. So this is the paradox, he muttered inwardly. To map the infinite, I must forsake mortal clarity. To walk as a man, I must turn from divine vision. Never again will both live in me. The oracle walked beside, steadying his forearm when ground turned treacherous. Her small hands, too light for their duty, held strength by prophecy rather than muscle. Asteron accepted help with bitterness turned gentle. He whispered hoarse, "If blindness is key, then I enter door, but may it not close upon you." She gave no reply beyond quiet gaze, her expression carrying both burden and bond. For the first time, Asteron sensed not just her mystery, but her weight of fate and the loneliness bound to it. So he pressed deeper into unfolding maps. Shadows draped the physical world, yet inside his mind glowing arteries stretched endless. He had gained sight of the vein, but at the cost of vision men cherish. The farther he charted, the less of human he remained. And still, half-blind yet compelled, he pressed forward, for the vein never ceased calling. The path narrowed until there was no distinction between step and shimmer. Asteron felt as if he walked not forward but inward, his chest squeezed by corridors of light. Then without warning it widened. Before him stretched a crossroads the likes of which no mortal had glimpsed. Rivers of brilliance raced across every direction, intersecting like pulsating veins in a body far greater than his own. They glowed with hues beyond language: saffron, cobalt, green that tasted metallic at the back of the tongue. The heart of the vein lay open, endless and alive. He stopped cold. For a heartbeat, his blindness of ordinary things vanished against the sheer assault of radiance. His one socket burned, nerves screaming with ancient fire. His charcoal dropped at his side. He could not sketch this. To try would be to mock it. Every river intersected 1,000 others, each loop birthing new eddies, as though the cosmos danced at pulse of living water. The oracle child clung tightly now, small fingers digging into his shoulder. He turned his head, but she was trembling. Where once her gaze shimmered with controlled visions, now she fractured. Threads of light shot from her eyes, thin and merciless, dragging her essence outward into streams. She gasped without sound, body juddering like puppet pulled by dozens of contradictory strings. Asteron shouted, voice ripped apart, catching her before she fell. His oversized hands pressed her close, yet still luminescent ribbons tugged. He realized with horror what was happening. The rivers knew her future role, sought to weave her into tapestry prematurely, to consume her as stabilizing anchor. Two paths opened cruelly. He could surrender her, allow the vein to draw her in, sacrifice her completely. Then the map he had chased for lifetime would resolve, stabilized by her dissolution. Completion, finality, immortality at cost of child-made vessel. Or he could resist, deny the vein its prize, and release her, thereby condemning his work to remain forever unfinished, a scattering of half-lines and contradictions. The crossroads shook violently under delay. Currents buckled, collapsing paths collapsing into dark gaps. Whole arteries trembled, threatening to implode into void. Asteron braced boots against luminous torrent, bearing her weight against chest. She cried soundless, fractures cutting across her cheeks like cracks in porcelain. He roared oath, half prayer, half defiance, and stepped forward directly into surge. Rivers whipped around him like whips of blazing steel. They sought to pry his arms open, to force surrender. He stumbled between pulsating junctions, each choice collapsing behind him the moment passed. Debris of reality itself spun like shards across void. Still he clutched her form, staggering, step after step. Charcoal, parchment, all forgotten, scattered in tearing wind. His sole measure was grip, stubborn refusal that compassion outweigh completion. The voice of the vein thundered inside his skull. It carried no language, only pressure. Finish the map, anchor eternity, obey. He spat blood, his own shout tearing. I will not purchase perfection with her life. With that declaration, something cracked inside. The rivers flared, then bent violently, recoiling as if struck. The oracle gasped, colour returning faintly though still fragile. He shielded her with body broad as wall, weathering lash after lash until currents began to retreat. Slowly, agonizingly, collapse steadied. Arteries drew back, pulse of whole nexus slowing to faint shudder. Junctions dimmed, leaving fragments half-lit, trembling but not destroyed. Into silence fell ash of burning light. World settled not into completion but into incompletion, messy, interrupted, raw. He stood swaying, clutching trembling girl, his own body near torn apart. His legs quivered beneath mass of decision, yet he endured. When the last surge subsided, the final river closed, and they stood within a hollow core. Only faint traces lingered, like veins fading slowly beneath skin after strain. His chest rose and fell, muscles aching, and within his hollow socket burned the dim spark of vision that had not fully left him. He bent his head toward the oracle. She breathed ragged but steady, her eyes shut. She had survived. The vein had not taken her. He sank onto knees, veins of luminous dust beneath him, glittering like broken stars. For long moments he said nothing, chest rising slow, voice locked. He thought of every toll before, the valley sacrificed, the doppelgangers merged, sight forsaken. Each price brittle compared to this. For here, choice struck deepest, choice against obsession itself. He pressed trembling lips to child's brow and whispered hoarse, "The map remains unfinished." And so must it be. The vein did not answer in words. Instead, silence flowed through vast chasm, neither punishing nor rewarding. Asteron accepted. He looked to parchment scattered torn among fading rivers. Pages flapped weakly, incomplete sketches smudged, many lines cut abruptly. These remains would never form resolution, yet strangely a calm touched him. For first time in endless journey, he felt freedom from gnawing compulsion. Imperial perfection yielded to compassion, and within that surrender of mastery, a different immortality flickered. He rose slowly, lifting exhausted oracle gently against his chest. Together they turned from ruins of rivers, their shadows stretching long against dim corridor. Behind them the vein pulsed, still alive, still immeasurable, refusing capture. Ahead lay return not to triumph, but to aftermath. As he stepped away, his voice rumbled quiet vow, mystery will remain, and where mystery endures, so too does life. The silence after struggle was unlike any he had known. Asteron stood in twilight where the living rivers once thundered, and only faint motes of dust glimmered. His chest ached, his arms trembled from holding the child against currents that would have devoured her. The veins' roar had retreated into distant murmurs, leaving not victory nor defeat, but residue, an unfinished echo. He glanced at his scattered parchments. Each sheet bore half lines, jagged turns, maps reduced to shadows, none connected seamlessly. The fragments looked less like atlases than wounds on paper, yet when he touched a page, it shimmered faintly, resonating with memory of currents he had glimpsed. The maps were partial visions, neither wholly false nor truly complete. They lived as haunting reminders of places forever beyond capture, and his eye, now vacant socket, throbbed with ache. In one sense, he was blind, unable to mark detail of ordinary horizon. Trees, cliffs, surf, they blurred into indistinct fog. But within his mind lived contrary blaze, threads of luminous flow that continued to pulse just beyond perception. He could never again separate the mundane from the transcendent. What had once been hunger for mastery had transmuted into coexistence with incompletion. The oracle, pale but breathing steady, looked at him finally without tremor. Her gaze seemed older, as though she had walked to brink of countless futures and returned scarred but whole. She said softly, "It remains alive because you refused." He tilted his head, absorbing weight of those words. Refusal had preserved not only her, but the vein itself. By denying perfection, he had allowed mystery to continue. He spread maps across rock, laying fragments in slow rhythm. None aligned seamlessly, yet together they resembled constellation half hidden by cloud. He realized their beauty stemmed not from closure, but from invitation. Anyone who looked would feel tug to imagine lines yet missing, paths yet unseen. The unfinished maps whispered possibility rather than command, and in that whisper life thrived more than in rigid certainty. Asteron's shoulders eased for the first time. He breathed deeply, no longer gnawed by compulsion, but gentled by release. His work would not make him immortal by name or fame, yet it might teach others to honor incompletion, to value compassion over conquest of truth. That was worth more than any empire of perfected lines. The child pressed her small hand to his and whispered, "We carry scars." He nodded. Both bore marks. She fractured by visions forced too soon. He blinded by sacrifice to glimpse what men should not wholly see. But those scars hummed meaning. They were reminders that knowledge comes laced with consequence, that mastery unchecked can destroy. Together, scars form story more enduring than any unbroken chart. So the vein remained alive, unmapped and free. Not conquered, but encountered. In leaving it unclaimed, Asteron spared its pulse for countless wanderers, yet unborn. His journey closed not with triumph, but with peace. He stacked maps, tied them loosely, and lifted his gaze toward the dimmed horizon where faint rivers still glimmered like breath behind a veil. And here we are, you and I, listening to the one-eyed cartographer who chose compassion over conquest. His invitation lingers, for even if no parchment completes, each of us carries unseen rivers, futures flowing quietly through night. Imagine your own unmapped landscapes waiting beyond dream's edge, not for mastery, but for gentler curiosity.